folks here at the Gov 2.0 Summit this morning got to see you talk a bit about XBRL and go wonky.
Yeah.
Good response?
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it. Data standards are painfully boring. You know, you want to make someone go away at a cocktail party. Say you work with data standards. You know, whether it's railroad gauge or time zones with, you know, the railroads, or wavelengths. We heard from the FCC, you know. There's this really fascinating history with how electricity and radio were built on standards. And XBRL is no different. More recently, you know, the web, nobody adopted HTTP. There was no market pull, really, for the web, but people adopted what was really a stack of standards. So we've got one layer on the stack that has to do with the money, that has to do with risk and transparency into money for the government to be able to do its job as a listening post, and for investors to see, but also for citizens to be able to give more and more visibility, get more visibility into what's going on in our markets.
So this is one of those things, as you say, standards are not generally a barn-burning issue, but when you establish the right grade for a railroad, when you establish the right frequency for people to tune into, when you establish the right format for transmitting data, interesting things happen.
That's right.
One of the interesting things that I'm watching right now is this requirement for public companies to submit their quarterly statements in XBRL, which is Extensible Business Resource Language.
Reporting language.
Reporting language.
It's all about business reporting. And actually, I'll just take advantage of that and say there's a lot of XML standards out there. Most of them have to do with transactions, right? Transactions are structured a certain way. They're more like messages. Reports are different. And it is one of the interesting things about what we're doing is that it's being able to go between a document and data. There's a lot of folks who wish that we could do everything in data, but probably in our lifetime, the lawyers and the accountants and the auditors are going to require a document. A document is a snapshot of a set of data. They're not going to sign a data set. Yeah, so XBRL is now required by the SEC. It's being phased in over 3 years. In the end, every publicly traded company will be required. There's actually 3 rules. The second rule has to do with mutual funds. All mutual funds will have to file what's known generally as a risk return report. That's being phased in too. And then actually last week, a taxonomy we built for the credit rating agencies, the S&Ps, Fitch, Moody's, was released. And they'll be actually giving their entire rating history in a report to the SEC in the structured data. So it means that for the first time, these reports will be consumed as they were filed, not as they were massaged or normalized by a third party sitting between me, the investor, and you, the corporation.
So that's the structure, that's the compliance side. You have to do these things. That's who's doing it. What I think gets a little interesting is what that then enables. As you say, there's a transparency angle. What kinds of potential is there out there for technologists who want to dig in to the feeds coming from the SEC to make or mash up services that will then provide investors, whether they're Wall Street folks or someone from Iowa, to get insight into the markets?
Well, first of all, one of the barriers we've dropped down is cost. There's no license, there's no fee. You know, a lot of standards associated with the markets had a fee. Even ID numbers have had fees attached to them that have limited the ability for just anybody to get access to the data. So this is an open source play, and it's really, we crowdsourced this 15,000 element taxonomy for GAAP, and we created a lot of experts in the process. So one of the things we do as a nonprofit standards organization is try to get the resources out there and make it easy to access the documentation that would enable somebody who's a developer or an integrator to take a look, try it out, that sort of thing. Because it's a report and because it solves the problem of structuring some of the most complex reports we have, the hard part isn't really the technology. The hard part's the domain knowledge. So you really have to understand what goes into these reports. I mentioned this morning that Citigroup's annual report, this financial statement, it's 1,400 pages long if you printed it up. So it's not only complex, it's really deep. So just the pension footnote might contain 63 specific facts, numbers, policy statements that are tagged narrative text, semi-structured, tables, dimensional data, and individual numbers, where getting to the data may not be that hard, but knowing, what that data means, being an expert in that subject matter is probably the bigger challenge.
So some platforms enable people who are non-technical to then manipulate data or get more out of it. In this case, this is just not going to be one of them. You have to.
I don't think so. This isn't like RSS or HTML, where because it's really dependent on this authoritative source of content, right? So GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, comes from FASB. This is a big operation up in Connecticut that has this, industry and government together, developing accounting standards with the leadership of the accounting profession. With what we're doing with corporate actions, it's ISO, International Standards Organization. That's where the content's coming from. So, when we talk about standards, it's often easy to confound the conversation because you have standards, GAAP, which is a standard, it's a shelf of books, what should be in a financial statement. And then you have a standard like XBRL, which is sort of the delivery vehicle for it. GAAP is the Coke, we're the can. And it allows us to, it's really a huge step forward, not only the technology, but the agreement that this is how we're going to structure financial statements. This is how we're going to structure a risk return. This is how we're going to structure a call report to the FDIC.
So, in a larger sense, one of the things the country has been struggling with now for a couple of years is the fallout from the financial crisis. And there are a number of reasons that came together as it did, both in the ways that certain financial instruments were created, both in the ways that regulators were scrutinizing or not scrutinizing various parts of the financial world, and also in the ways that risk itself was calculated in terms of the issue of systemic risk, the whole idea of a systemic risk regulator. And we'll still see what this financial regulatory law actually means. So how does the kind of transparency that the adoption of XBRL really ushers into the financial system have the potential to insulate the system and investors against some of those issues?
Well, a lot of it's about going all the way upstream to the source. Whether you're talking about effort, data integrity, cost, the cost of collecting the data after the fact, checking and double checking, versus having it structured according to a specific sort of unified dictionary from the first mile. Now, there's a lot of hard questions about who collects, where is it collected, who has access, but all of that's academic if you don't have the means to collect the data in the first place. And I really think this is about being able to go all the way to the origination point of these documents. It's never really been done before. There were a lot of firsts here. This is the first XML standard specified by law. This is the first time that the issuers have, when it leaves the building, it's structured and ready to mash up, ready to be used by the government, investors. Last week we released our first iPhone app, XBRL Labs, released a simple app that just, you get a notification, Agilent just filed with the SEC an hour ago, right? But when it came, a minute after they file, I could look at it, broken down balance sheet, within the balance sheet, the elements of the balance sheet, and I can email it to you as an Excel spreadsheet 1 minute later. There's no software, there's no cost involved. It's structured, to organize or to structure, to normalize it. And It's a lot more than just agreeing on the column headings. The metadata we're putting around each fact has to do with business rules, so it validates on the way in, presentation rules so that you can recreate an old style balance sheet, you know, indentation and that sort of thing. Calculation relationships between. It's a really deep set of metadata, and the fact that we've got not just the face financials, but the facts that are found embedded in narrative text and footnotes. Again, you know, we started with the whole inventory of possible facts, and it's being updated now by FASB, who own the content, and now they're managing the container. We just sort of primed the pump by doing the development work as a federal contractor to the SEC.
So given the success and adoption driven by XBRL compliance here, what is the potential of this standard to be adopted elsewhere in government now that it is established namespaces, now that it actually is out there and has been codified, has really become part of the financial reporting fabric? Is there other places in government or business where this could take hold?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why Donna Roy from NIEM, from Homeland Security, was presenting with me. We see a tremendous potential. You know, the most immediate applications are strictly financial. So government grants, right? The government funds almost everything we think of as federal programs through gigantic grants to states: Medicare, Medicaid, transportation, affordable housing, social services, education. There's the reporting, both directions between the federal and state governments, but also you know, the Bank Secrecy Act, anti-terrorist, you know, banking-related surveillance. These are all things that are sort of no-brainers that we think are really next on the horizon. But corporate governance, compensation. You know, a lot of what we're doing on the corporate exercise are legal documents, government contracting. These are all things, you know, the budgeting process. These are all examples of, yeah, I really think that the folks that work in the federal government do all they can with the tools they have right now to give a faithful rendition of, you know, what the finances are. But in terms of accessibility, you know, we've got a long way to go, and I think having it structured, when, you know, we're talking about very inexpensive or free tools to tag inside of Excel, where a lot of this data starts, is a giant leap forward.
Well, we'll see whether the adoption takes off.
Yeah, sure hope so.
Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks, Alex.